The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor burned in my nostrils as I hurried toward the ICU. The late night call still echoed in my mind. Mrs. Carter, your father's had another stroke. Your mother is quite disoriented. You should come quickly. I hadn't spoken to my parents in 4 months, not since that disastrous Thanksgiving when I'd stormed out, vowing never to return. Now here I was, racing through sterile hallways at 2 a.m., my heart pounding with a complex mixture of concern, anger, and guilt. As I rounded the corner, I stopped dead. There, hunched on a plastic chair outside my father's room, was my brother Richard. He looked up, his face haggard and drawn in ways I'd never seen before. For a moment, our eyes locked. The successful attorney's sister and the small-town politician brother, bound by blood but separated by decades of rivalry and resentment. "Marion," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I replied, the words sharper than I intended. "How is he?" "Stable for now. Mom's with him." "She's—" He hesitated, running a hand through his graying hair. "She's having a bad day. The stress has made the dementia worse." I nodded curtly, preparing to brush past him into the room. But then Richard caught my arm, his grip surprisingly desperate. "Marion, wait. There's something you need to know. About the money you've been sending." His voice cracked, a sound so unfamiliar from my perpetually self-assured older brother that it stopped me cold. "I didn't use it for the farm. I used it for my campaign. And now they're investigating me for misappropriation of public funds." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. 6 months of sending substantial portions of my partner-level law firm's salary, supposedly to save our family farm, all diverted to my brother's political aspirations. In that moment, standing in the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital corridor, I realized this wasn't just about sibling rivalry anymore. This was about our parents' failing health, our family's legacy, and the tangled web of lies that threatened to unravel all of us. Flashback. Thanksgiving 6 months earlier. 6 months earlier, I'd driven from Chicago to my childhood home in rural Illinois for Thanksgiving. At 56, I was a partner at one of Chicago's prestigious law firms specializing in family law. Divorce, custody battles, estate disputes. I'd built my career helping others navigate family conflicts while my own remained unresolved. The family farm came into view as I rounded the final bend, a sprawling property that had been in the Carter family for generations. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension that always accompanied my visits home. My mother, Elizabeth, now 78, greeted me at the door with a slightly confused smile. "Marion, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." It was the first sign something was off. I'd confirmed my arrival time just the day before. "It is tomorrow, Mom," I said gently, noticing how she blinked in momentary confusion before laughing it off. Inside, my father Joseph sat in his weathered armchair, the television blaring louder than I remembered. At 80, he still carried himself with the proud bearing of a man who'd worked the land his entire life, despite the slight droop on the left side of his face, a remnant of his stroke 8 months ago. "You're looking well, Dad," I said, bending to kiss his cheek. He grunted in response. "Richard's been handling everything while I recover. Don't know what we'd do without him." And there it was, the familiar refrain that had shaped our family dynamic for decades. Richard, the dutiful son who'd stayed, versus Marion, the daughter who'd left. My brother arrived an hour later with his second wife and their teenage son. At 60, Richard had the polished look of a small-town politician, town council member, as he never failed to remind anyone who'd listen. His hair might have grayed, but his confident smile remained unchanged from our childhood. "The prodigal sister returns," he said, embracing me with a heartiness that never quite reached his eyes. "How's the big city treating you? Still cleaning up other people's marital messes?" "The practice is doing well," I replied evenly. "My son just finished grad school, by the way. He sends his love but couldn't make it. He's in Boston for a conference." "Always the achievers. You too," Richard said with a laugh that carried an edge. Meanwhile, we simple folk keep the family legacy alive. Dinner was a painful affair of strained conversations and pointed remarks. My mother repeatedly confused past and present, at one point asking about my husband. I'd been divorced for 15 years. My father dozed off twice, only to wake disoriented and irritable. Richard dominated the conversation with tales of his council accomplishments and farm improvements. It was when my mother praised Richard for somehow keeping the bank from foreclosing that I felt something shift inside me. For the past 6 months, I'd been quietly transferring substantial sums to the farm's account after Richard had called, explaining our parents' mounting medical bills and farm expenses. Actually, I said, my attorney voice taking over. I believe the foreclosure was avoided because of the transfers I've been making since June. The table fell silent. My mother looked confused, while my father's brow furrowed. Richard's face remained perfectly composed as he laughed. Marion, always with the jokes. Mom, Dad, Marion's been sending a little help here and there, but nothing that would keep the wolves from the door. I've been juggling the farm accounts and taking out personal loans to keep everything afloat. My father nodded approvingly. Richard's been working miracles with the finances. Those weren't little transfers, Richard, I said, my voice steady despite my rising anger. I've sent over $75,000 in 6 months. My mother gasped. That can't be right. Richard's been handling everything. Richard's smile never faltered. Marion, I think you're confused about the amounts. Why would you bring this up at Thanksgiving dinner anyway? Always looking for attention at the wrong moment. It was a familiar accusation, one that had been leveled at me since childhood whenever I challenged the family narrative. But I was no longer a little girl seeking approval. I was a woman who'd spent decades building a career on evidence and truth. I have the receipts for every transfer, I said. I can show you exactly where the money went. Don't be ridiculous, my father snapped, his voice carrying that note of finality I remembered from childhood. Richard wouldn't lie about something like this. My mother reached across to pat Richard's hand. Your sister's always been competitive. Don't take it personally. I looked at my brother, expecting at least a flicker of shame. Instead, I saw only the calculated confidence of a man who knew he wouldn't be questioned. The attorney's investigation. The following Monday, I didn't return to my office at the law firm. Instead, I walked into the private banking section of Bank of America in downtown Chicago, where I'd been making the transfers to the farm account. Ms. Carter, the banking officer greeted me. What can I do for you today? I need copies of all transfers I've made to the Carter family farm account since June, I said, sliding my ID across the desk. And I'd like to know exactly how those funds were accessed. While the officer retrieved the records, I made another call to Dr. Patel, my parents' physician in their small Illinois town. As a family law attorney, I knew the legal complexities of medical privacy, but I also knew how to navigate them. Dr. Patel, this is Marion Carter, Joseph and Elizabeth Carter's daughter. I'm concerned about changes I've noticed in my parents' behavior. Before I file for any formal capacity assessment, I wanted to speak with you directly. There was a pause on the line. Ms. Carter, I've been trying to reach your brother about your parents for months. Your father's post-stroke care has been inconsistent at best, and your mother's cognitive decline is progressing faster than it should without proper intervention. My hand tightened around the phone. Richard hasn't been bringing them in for appointments, sporadically at best. Your father needs consistent physical therapy, and your mother should be on medication to slow the dementia progression. I've prescribed both, but he trailed off, professional discretion battling with obvious concern. By the time I left the bank 2 hours later, I had a complete record of my transfers, and the disturbing confirmation that most of the money had been immediately transferred to an account under Richard's name alone, not the farm's operating account. I also had Dr. Patel's permission to access my parents' medical records, which painted a concerning picture of neglected care. The drive back to the farm the next day was filled with a cold, calculated anger I rarely allowed myself to feel. As a divorce attorney, I'd learned to channel emotion into strategic action. Now I was applying those same skills to my own family crisis. The farm looked different in the harsh November light, more run down than I'd noticed during my brief Thanksgiving visit. The tractor that should have been stored properly sat exposed to the elements, rust beginning to form along its edges. The barn door hung askew on its hinges. These weren't just signs of a struggling farm. They were evidence of neglect. My mother was alone in the kitchen when I arrived, kneading dough with the practiced movements of a woman who'd done so for decades, though her eyes held a distant quality that tightened my chest. Marion? She said, momentarily confused. Didn't you just leave yesterday? That was a few days ago, Mom, I said gently, setting my briefcase on the kitchen table. Is Dad around? And Richard? I need to speak with all of you. Your father's resting. Richard's at a council meeting. She frowned at the briefcase. Are you here on business? In a way, I replied, helping her wipe flour from her hands. Mom, when was the last time you saw Dr. Patel? Her eyes clouded. The doctor? I don't. Richard handles all that. He says I'm fine, just a little forgetful. And Dad's physical therapy? For his stroke? Oh, Richard said that was too expensive. He's been helping your father with exercises himself. Each word was another piece of a puzzle I was beginning to understand all too clearly. By the time my father shuffled into the kitchen, followed shortly by Richard returning from his council meeting, though I'd confirmed no meeting was scheduled that day, I had arranged the documents from my briefcase in precise order on the kitchen table. What's all this? My father demanded, his voice weaker than the commanding tone I remembered from childhood. Evidence, I said simply, meeting my brother's suddenly wary eyes. Bank transfers, medical records, and farm account statements. Richard, would you like to explain where the $75,000 I sent for the farm and our parents' medical care actually went? Or should I detail how it was diverted to your personal account and coincidentally your re-election campaign fund? The confrontation. Richard's politician mask slipped for just a moment before he recovered, forcing a laugh. Marion, you're blowing this out of proportion. I've been juggling multiple accounts to keep everything afloat. The farm, the medical bills, everything. I slid the bank statements across the table. These aren't farm expenses, Richard. These are campaign contributions, personal purchases, and payments to political consultants. My father's face darkened as he stared at the papers, confusion and anger battling in his expression. What is she talking about, Richard? Dad, don't get upset. Your blood pressure, Richard began, the concern in his voice sounding rehearsed. Don't change the subject, I interrupted. Mom hasn't been taking her prescribed dementia medication. Dad hasn't received proper physical therapy. The farm is falling apart. Meanwhile, you've been using my money to fund your council re-election campaign. My mother's hands trembled as she picked up one of the medical reports. I don't understand these, she said, her voice small. It says you have early-stage dementia, Mom, I explained gently. It's treatable with proper medication and care. Care you haven't been receiving because Richard has been diverting the money meant for your treatment. Richard's face flushed with anger. You have no right to come in here and make these accusations. I've been here every day taking care of them while you've been in Chicago playing big shot attorney. These aren't accusations, I said, keeping my voice steady. These are documented facts. The money I sent was supposed to help our parents and save the farm. Instead, you used it to further your political career. My father stared at Richard, the man he'd always defended, always favored. For the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. Is this true, son? Richard's composure cracked. The campaign needed funding. I was going to pay it all back once I secured the right position on the agricultural committee. I could have brought grants to the farm, fixed everything. And our parents' medical care? I pressed. I thought they were fine. Dad seemed to be recovering on his own, and Mom's just getting older, that's all. My mother's confusion had given way to an unusual clarity. You told me the doctor said I was fine, she said quietly. You said I didn't need those expensive pills. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the old kitchen clock. My father slowly gathered the papers, his hands shaking slightly from more than just his condition. I think you should leave, Richard, he said finally, his voice carrying none of the warmth it usually held for his son. Richard looked stunned. Dad, you can't be serious. Marion shows up with some paperwork and you're taking her side? After everything I've done for this family. What have you done except lie? My father asked, his voice breaking. My medical care, your mother's condition, the farm we entrusted to you. all neglected while you chased your political ambitions with money your sisters sent to help us. Richard turned to me, his expression hardening. This is what you wanted all along, isn't it? To turn them against me? To be the favorite for once? The accusation stung, but I met his gaze steadily. What I wanted was for our parents to receive proper care and for the family farm to be preserved. That's still what I want. Well, good luck with that, Richard sneered, grabbing his coat. The farm's mortgage to the hilt. Dad's medical bills are months overdue. And your precious evidence? It might help them, but it'll destroy me. The ethics committee is already investigating campaign finance irregularities. If this gets out, my career is over. He slammed the door as he left, leaving behind a silence heavy with decades of family dysfunction finally exposed to the light. The breaking point. That night, I stayed at the farm, helping my disoriented mother to bed and sitting with my father as he processed the day's revelations. The once proud man who'd rarely shown weakness now looked defeated, slumped in his chair as he stared at family photos on the mantel. I should have seen it, he said finally. The farm equipment falling into disrepair, bills piling up despite your supposed contributions. Richard always had an explanation. You wanted to believe him, I said, not unkindly. He's your son. The one who stayed. My father turned to me, his eyes clearer than they'd been all day. And you're my daughter, the one who left. The one I pushed away. He swallowed hard. I was wrong, Marion. About so many things. Those words, an admission I'd waited decades to hear, should have brought satisfaction. Instead, they brought a profound sadness for all the years we'd lost to stubbornness and misunderstanding. The next morning, I drove back to Chicago, not in anger this time, but with purpose. At my law office, I began crafting 2 sets of documents: a formal complaint to the ethics committee regarding Richard's misappropriation of funds, and a family trust structure that would protect my parents and the farm from further financial exploitation. I canceled client meetings and court appearances, delegating cases to my associates. For once, my family would take priority over my career, not from obligation, but from choice. 2 weeks later, I returned to the farm with healthcare providers I'd arranged: a physical therapist for my father, a neurologist specializing in dementia for my mother, and a home health aide to assist with daily care. I'd also hired a farm manager to assess what could be salvaged of the operation. As I explained the arrangements to my parents at the kitchen table, my mother reached across and took my hand, a gesture so unexpected it momentarily silenced me. You were always the responsible one, she said, with a clarity that came and went with her condition. Even as a little girl. I should have appreciated that more. My father nodded, the stroke weakened side of his face giving his expression an unintended vulnerability. We put everything on Richard's shoulders because he stayed. That wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't fair to you. I thought about the little girl who desperately sought her parents' approval, who'd eventually given up and channeled that need into professional achievement instead. I thought about my brother, crushed under the weight of expectations and resentment until he'd resorted to deception and theft. We all made mistakes, I said finally. But it's not too late to do better. I didn't tell them I'd given Richard a choice: enter a rehabilitation program for his growing dependence on alcohol, another discovery I'd made during my investigation, and work with me to make restitution, or face formal charges. He'd chosen the former, though whether from genuine remorse or calculation, I couldn't yet tell. That evening, I called my son in Boston. James, I said when he answered, how would you feel about spending Christmas at your grandparents' farm this year? They'd love to see you, and I think I'll be spending more time there in the coming months. The farm? Really? His surprise was evident. You haven't wanted to go there for holidays in years. Things are changing, I replied, watching the sunset over the fields that had shaped and scarred my family for generations. Sometimes you have to go back to move forward. Flashback. Hospital corridor. 4 months into this new arrangement, I'd established a rhythm. 3 days in Chicago at my law practice, 4 days at the farm, working remotely while overseeing my parents' care. The farm manager had salvaged what he could of the operation, though years of neglect had taken their toll. The family trust I'd established ensured that medical needs would be met regardless of agricultural income. Richard had completed rehab and was working with a therapist. His political career was over. He'd resigned from the council before the ethics investigation could formally conclude, but he'd avoided criminal charges. Our relationship remained strained, our conversations limited to necessary discussions about our parents' care. Then came the late night call that changed everything again. My father had suffered another stroke, more severe this time. By the time I reached the hospital, the doctor's expression told me what words would soon confirm. This wasn't a crisis we would overcome with physical therapy and determination. Which brought me to this moment, standing in the hospital corridor, facing my brother's confession about misusing the money I'd sent. A confession that seemed meaningless now in the face of our father's mortality. Marion, Richard said, his voice rough with emotion, "I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but I need you to know I'm sorry. Not just for the money, but for everything. For resenting you all these years. For pushing you away from the family. For failing our parents when they needed me." In the harsh hospital lighting, my once powerful brother looked diminished, the confident politician replaced by a man confronting the wreckage of his choices. For the first time, I saw something in him I recognized. The same desperate longing for approval that had driven my own life choices. "You know what the worst part was?" he continued, words spilling out as if a dam had broken. "I was always jealous of you. You had the courage to leave, to build your own life. I stayed because I was afraid. Afraid of failing somewhere else. Afraid of losing Dad's approval. Every time you succeeded, it felt like a reminder of my own limitations." The admission stunned me into silence. All these years, I'd believed Richard had everything: our parents' love, the family legacy, the hometown respect. I'd never considered that he might have envied my freedom as much as I'd envied his secure place in the family. "Richard," I began, but was interrupted by a doctor emerging from our father's room. "Ms. Carter? Mr. Carter? Your father is asking for both of you." We entered the room together, no longer the successful attorney and the disgraced politician, but simply a daughter and son facing the impending loss of their father. My mother sat beside the bed, her dementia momentarily cleared by the crisis, holding Dad's hand with gentle determination. "My children," Dad said, his voice barely audible, the effort of speaking visible in every word. "Together. That's good." In that moment, the decades of rivalry and resentment seemed suddenly small and distant. There would be time later for rebuilding trust, for establishing new boundaries, for healing old wounds. For now, we were simply family, gathered together as our father had always wanted us to be. Epilogue. A new chapter. Spring came to the farm, bringing with it both renewal and transition. My father didn't live to see the apple trees bloom. He passed peacefully 2 weeks after that night in the hospital, with all of us by his side. My mother's dementia continued its slow progression, but with proper medication and care, she had more good days than bad. I made the decision to scale back my law practice to part-time status, dividing my week between Chicago and the farm. My partners were understanding. At 56, I'd earned the right to redefine my professional commitments. Richard had moved to a small apartment in town. He was working with the farm manager now, learning the business from the ground up in a way he'd never bothered to before. Our conversations were still careful, the trust between us fragile and newly forming, but there was an honesty that had never existed before. One evening, as I sat on the porch with my mother, watching the sunset paint the fields gold, she turned to me with unexpected clarity. "You know," she said, "your father always admired your independence. He just didn't know how to show it." I smiled, taking her hand. "I know, Mom. And Richard," she continued, "he tried so hard to be what your father wanted." "Too hard, maybe." "We all did, in our own ways," I replied. My mother nodded, her gaze distant. "Families are complicated. You spend your whole life figuring them out, and just when you think you understand, everything changes." The wisdom in her words caught me by surprise, a moment of profound insight breaking through the fog of her condition. Later that night, I called my son James, now considering a job offer that would bring him closer to Illinois. As we talked about his plans, I realized how much my relationship with him differed from what I'd experienced with my own parents. The openness, the mutual respect, the absence of rigid expectations. These weren't accidents, but choices I'd made, determined not to repeat the patterns of my childhood. The family trust I'd established had evolved into a more comprehensive plan, The farmland would be partially maintained as a working operation, partially converted to a more sustainable model. The main house would be adapted for my mother's needs, with space for me during my stays and eventually, perhaps, as my permanent home when Chicago no longer called to me. Richard and I would never have the easy sibling relationship some families enjoyed. Too much had happened, too many wounds had been inflicted. But we had reached an understanding based on truth rather than facade, on acceptance of our flaws rather than competition for approval. As for me, at 56, I'd found an unexpected new chapter opening in my life. Not the retirement I'd vaguely envisioned, not the continuation of my all-consuming legal career, but something in between. A reclaiming of family connections on my own terms, a reconciliation with my past that didn't require surrendering my identity. The farm that had been both haven and battleground throughout my life was transforming once again, becoming neither an obligation nor an escape, but simply a part of who I was, one thread in the complex tapestry of family, with all its painful tangles and unexpected patterns of beauty. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the happy ending of childhood stories. But it was real, and it was ours, and for now, that was enough. I never imagined seeing them both broken on the same day. Yet there they were, Julia, pregnant and abandoned, begging for my forgiveness in the middle of a crowded mall, and John, my ex-husband, drunk and defeated on my mother's doorstep hours later. How quickly fortunes change in a year. Melissa, please. John's bloodshot eyes looked up at me, his voice cracking as he struggled to stand from my mother's front steps. I've lost everything. Let me come home. I stared at the disheveled stranger before me. This man who once called my pregnant body a damn elephant waddling around, who abandoned me for my best friend when I was 6 months pregnant with his child. His once immaculate appearance was gone, his hair unwashed, his designer clothes wrinkled and stained, the stench of alcohol surrounding him like a cloud. Now he wanted salvation. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months after he left, I'd fantasized about this moment, him crawling back, desperate and sorry. I thought I'd feel vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, I felt nothing. The man who once held such power over my emotions now seemed pathetically small. Home? I repeated, my daughter Emma sleeping peacefully inside, unaware her father was outside our door for the first time in her life. This stopped being your home the moment you chose her over us. Flashback, the discovery. It all collapsed 13 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon that started like any other. I was folding baby clothes in the nursery we had just painted yellow, humming to myself, feeling Emma kick inside me. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Karen standing there, her face pale with reluctance. I knew something was wrong the second I saw her. Come in, I said, concern rising in my chest. What's happened? She sat awkwardly on the edge of our couch, the one John and I had spent weeks choosing, arguing playfully about leather versus fabric. Karen twisted her hands in her lap, avoiding my eyes. I saw John today with Julia, she finally said, each word falling between us like stones. They were coming out of a hotel together. They kissed in the hallway. My mind rejected the information, creating a strange buzzing in my ears. John and Julia? My husband and my best friend of 12 years? Julia, who had helped me pick out my wedding dress, who had cried with me through 3 miscarriages before this pregnancy finally took. What do you mean? A hotel? I remember asking, my voice oddly calm, as if we were discussing someone else's life. Are you sure? This is a serious accusation. Karen nodded, her eyes full of pity. My cousins were visiting, staying at that hotel. I was on my way to their room when I saw them. They didn't see me, but they were coming out of a room together. They kissed right there in the hallway. She paused, her voice softening. I'm so sorry, Melissa, but you needed to know. I sat down, my hand instinctively covering my 6-month pregnant belly, as if to shield our daughter from what I was hearing. The nursery mobile I'd been assembling that morning still lay on the coffee table, its tiny stars and moons suspended in midair, just like my life. Did they see you? I asked, focusing on this irrelevant detail rather than the collapsing reality around me. No, Karen said. I ducked into the stairwell. I nodded mechanically, as if this information made any difference at all. My world was falling apart in my living room, and all I could think about was whether they knew they'd been caught. Flashback. The confrontation. That night, I waited for John, my stomach in knots and my heart pounding in my chest. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would remain calm and dignified. When his car pulled into the driveway, something in me hardened. I needed truth, not his usual charm and deflection. John walked in casually, loosening his tie, the same tie I'd given him for his birthday last year. He kissed my cheek absently, the way he always did, as if this day was no different from any other. Before he could even set down his keys, I asked, "How long has it been going on with Julia?" His expression shifted from confusion to defensiveness in seconds. "What are you talking about?" he said, but his eyes darted away from mine. "Karen saw you at the hotel with Julia today. You kissed her in the hallway." "Karen?" He scoffed, reaching for a glass in the cabinet. "That woman's nuts. She probably misunderstood something innocent." I'd expected denial, but not this dismissive tone, as if my concerns were trivial, as if I was being hysterical. I'd seen this tactic before. My father used it on my mother for years before she finally found the courage to leave him. He'd call her paranoid, oversensitive, until she began to doubt her own perception of reality. "Don't you dare lie to me, John." My voice broke as anger overtook my practiced calm. "Karen isn't nuts, and you know it. She saw you with Julia leaving a hotel room. She saw you kiss her. So don't stand there and insult my intelligence." He paced our kitchen like a caged animal, throwing his hands up in frustration. "Melissa, you're blowing this out of proportion," he snapped. "Karen probably saw something innocent and twisted it in her head. Julia and I are just friends, that's all." Just then, Emma kicked inside me, a flutter that reminded me what was really at stake. This wasn't just about me or my marriage. This was about our daughter, about the family that was supposed to welcome her in 3 months. "Do you even care about us, John?" I asked, my voice quieter but heavy with emotion. "Do you care about your daughter? She's in here, moving, while you stand there lying to my face." His eyes flickered to my belly momentarily, but his face remained cold and unreadable. "This isn't about the baby," he said flatly. "Don't make this more dramatic than it needs to be." It was in that moment I knew I was truly on my own. I felt tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. Flashback, the cruelty, what followed still haunts me sometimes. John's mask fell completely, revealing a cruelty I never knew lived inside the man I'd married. "You've been nothing but a whiny, overgrown baby ever since you got pregnant," he snapped, his voice ice cold. "Every day it's something. Your back hurts, your feet are swollen, you're tired. I get it, you're pregnant, but you act like you're the first woman in the world to have a kid. It's pathetic." I stood frozen as he looked me up and down, his face twisting with disgust. "You're massive, Melissa. Honestly, you're starting to look like a damn elephant waddling around here. It's embarrassing." His words stabbed deeper with each syllable. "You don't even try anymore. It's just sweatpants and that ugly greasy bun. Julia, she's gorgeous. She actually takes care of herself, and she's fun to be around. You? You're just a moody, needy mess, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." Growing up, I'd watched my father belittle my mother about her appearance after each of my siblings was born. He'd make comments about her weight, about how she'd let herself go. I'd sworn I'd never let a man speak to me that way. Yet here I was, standing in my kitchen, being torn apart by the father of my unborn child. "You don't even care," I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. "Not about me, not about Emma, not about anything we built together." He just shrugged, his expression cold and indifferent. "I've moved on, Melissa," he said flatly. "Maybe you should too." Those words hit me like a slap, and I realized in that moment that the man I thought I'd married had never really existed. Flashback, the aftermath. The next morning, I packed what I could into 2 suitcases and left. I couldn't stay in that house, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. Every corner reminded me of him, of us, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. My mother had offered weeks ago for me to stay with her if I needed support during the pregnancy, sensing something was wrong before I did. Mothers often do. When I arrived at her house, She took one look at me and opened her arms. I collapsed against her, finally letting the tears come. It was the first time I'd cried since Karen told me the truth. "It's going to be okay, Melissa," she whispered, holding me tightly. "You and Emma are going to be okay. I'm here, and we'll get through this together." My mother understood what it meant to start over. She'd done it herself at 40, leaving my father after 20 years of emotional abuse. I'd been 16 then, angry at her for breaking up our family. Now, at 32, I finally understood her courage. The weeks that followed blurred together. John vanished from my life. No calls, no texts, no questions about the baby, nothing. It was as if he had erased us from his world, like we had never existed to him. The man who had shared my bed for 4 years, who had cried when we saw our daughter on the ultrasound, who had painted her nursery and assembled her crib, had simply erased us from his life. My mother never said, "I told you so," though she'd had reservations about John from the beginning. Instead, she helped me prepare for Emma's arrival, turning her sewing room into a nursery, accompanying me to doctor's appointments, holding my hand through the fear and uncertainty. When I moved into my mom's house, I packed away every photo of him, every trace of him from my old life, and tucked them into a box I shoved into the back of the closet. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about him, not in longing, but in disbelief. How could someone just disappear from their own child's life before it had even begun? It was like John had never existed, but his absence was loud, and it echoed in every moment I was left to face alone. Flashback: Emma's birth. When Emma finally arrived, something shifted inside me. The labor was long and difficult, 18 hours of pain that seemed endless. But when they placed her in my arms for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I felt an overwhelming wave of love that washed away everything else. "You look just like her," my mother said softly, tears in her eyes as she stood beside the hospital bed. "Just like Melissa when she was born." In that moment, I realized John's absence had become irrelevant. What mattered was this perfect little person in my arms, and the unconditional love I felt for her. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. It didn't matter that John wasn't there. It didn't matter that he had chosen to walk away. In that moment, all that mattered was Emma, and she was mine, my beautiful, precious little girl. The early weeks with Emma were a whirlwind of exhaustion and joy. Between the late night feedings and figuring out how to be a mom, I barely had time to think about anything else. She had the most beautiful eyes, big and bright, full of wonder, and when she looked at me, it felt like everything was going to be okay. My mother helped a lot, but I insisted on doing as much as possible myself. Each small victory, getting through a night alone, soothing Emma's cries, watching her grow, rebuilt my confidence piece by piece. There were still moments when the loneliness crept in. I'd see fathers doting on their kids at the grocery store or hear friends talk about their partners helping with nighttime feeds, and it stung. But then I'd look at Emma, and all the sadness faded. She was my world now, and every smile she gave me, every little coo, made it all worth it. I didn't need John to be happy. I had everything I needed right there in my arms. Present day mall encounter: "Melissa?" The voice stopped me in my tracks. I was at the mall, enjoying my first few hours alone since Emma's birth. My mother had insisted I take some time for myself, promising to watch Emma. I turned, and my heart stopped. It was Julia. She looked different, her face pale, eyes red and puffy, and there was no mistaking the slight swell of her stomach. Before I could react, she rushed toward me, her voice breaking. "Melissa, I'm so sorry," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks as she grabbed my arm. I froze completely, caught off guard. Julia, the woman who had shattered my life, was standing in front of me, crying like a child. She didn't seem like the confident, manipulative person I remembered. Her shoulders were slumped, her designer clothes replaced by a baggy sweater, and her hands trembled as she wiped her face. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she sobbed, her words tumbling over each other. "But I need to tell you everything." I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for her to continue. "John left me," she choked out. He, he lost his job a few months after we got together, and things got bad. He started gambling, drinking, and when I told him I was pregnant, he just left. He said he couldn't handle it. She covered her face, her body shaking with sobs. I don't know what to do, Melissa. I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it. Julia's father had gambled away their family home when she was 12. She'd once told me it was why she was so obsessed with financial security, with finding a stable man. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on me. She'd stolen what she thought was stability, only to discover it was a facade. Please, Melissa, she begged, her voice breaking. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to forgive me. I was selfish and stupid, and I ruined everything. I wish I could take it all back. For months, I'd imagined this moment, Julia begging for forgiveness, me delivering the perfect, cutting response that would make her feel as small as I'd felt. But standing there, watching her fall apart in the middle of the mall, I felt nothing but a quiet understanding that vengeance is often unnecessary. Life has its own way of balancing accounts. Without a word, I turned and walked away, leaving her there in the middle of the mall. Present day, doorstep confrontation. I never expected to find John waiting on my mother's doorstep when I returned from the mall. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. He looked so different, unkempt, exhausted, and reeking of alcohol. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and he barely looked like the man I used to know. Melissa, he muttered, struggling to stand. I needed to see you. My mother had taken Emma for a walk, a small mercy I was grateful for. I didn't want my daughter's first glimpse of her father to be this broken man. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice sharp and unforgiving. He staggered slightly, leaning against the door frame. I'm sorry, he stammered. I love you, Melissa. I love Emma. Please let me come back. I'll fix everything. I swear I will. His voice cracked, but all I felt was disgust and a cold, biting clarity. John's father had abandoned his family when he was 8, leaving his mother to raise 3 children alone. He'd once told me, in a rare vulnerable moment, that his greatest fear was becoming his father. Yet here he was, having done exactly that, abandoned his child before she was even born. Sorry? I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. You're sorry? You left us without a second thought, and now you're here, smelling like a bar, talking about feeling sorry and loving us? Where was that love when I was 6 months pregnant and you walked out on me? Where was it when Emma was born and I was in the hospital alone? He ran a hand through his messy hair, his shoulders slumping like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. I know, Melissa, he said, his voice cracking. I know I've screwed up. I've lost everything. You, Emma, my job, my money. I've been such an idiot, and I can't stop thinking about what I threw away. Please, just give me a chance to make it right. A year ago, these words might have moved me. Now, they simply confirmed what I already knew. His regret wasn't about losing us. It was about losing his comfortable life. No, John, I said finally, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. You're not part of my life anymore. Emma and we're better off without you. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. He broke down, his sobs quiet but heart-wrenching, and for a brief moment, I felt sorry for him. But I knew I had to stay strong, for myself and for Emma. Without another word, I stepped past him, unlocked the door, and closed it behind me, leaving him outside in the dark. Epilogue. New beginnings. Inside, I leaned against the door, the weight of the day finally hitting me. In one day, both people who had nearly destroyed my life, John and Julia, had shown up, broken and ruined by their own choices. I didn't have to lift a finger for it to happen. They had done it to themselves, consumed by the same selfishness and deceit that had shattered my world over a year ago. Later that night, I stood in Emma's room, watching my daughter sleep peacefully in her crib. The soft glow of her nightlight illuminated her perfect little face, so trusting, so innocent. I thought back to everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights wondering how I would raise Emma on my own. Through it all, I had lived my life with dignity, focusing on my daughter and rebuilding my own sense of worth. My mother appeared in the doorway, her expression questioning. Are you okay? She asked softly, coming to stand beside me. I nodded, surprisingly at peace. When Dad left, you told me something I didn't understand until today. She looked down at her granddaughter, a small smile playing on her lips. What was that? You said sometimes the things we think will break us actually set us free. I smiled at the memory. I thought you were just trying to make me feel better about the divorce. But you were right. My mother squeezed my hand. Emma will never doubt her worth because of a man. You'll make sure of that. We both will, I said, leaning my head on her shoulder. I climbed the stairs quietly and peeked into Emma's room. She was fast asleep, her tiny face peaceful and perfect in the soft glow of the nightlight. I leaned down and kissed her forehead, feeling a surge of gratitude and love. This was my life now, and looking at my daughter's innocent face, I knew with absolute certainty that it was going to be beautiful. You had no right to sell what wasn't yours, Frank, I said, my voice barely above a whisper but sharp enough to cut through the tension in my living room. My hands trembled as I clutched the legal documents Jennifer had prepared. This ends now. Frank's face, that face that had charmed my mother 20 years ago, twisted with anger. The facade of the charming stepfather was crumbling before my eyes. You've always been so ungrateful, Sarah, he spat, pacing around my living room like a caged animal. I've been managing things while you're off playing Florence Nightingale in the middle of nowhere. That cabin was just sitting there, empty most of the time. That cabin is mine, I replied, my voice growing stronger with each word. Mine and Jennifer's. You know that. He laughed, that hollow sound I'd grown to dread over the years. It was an easy way to clear my debts. You'll thank me later. I'll thank you when hell freezes over. The words hung in the air between us. 20 years of suppressed anger, of boundaries crossed, of manipulations endured, all condensed into this single moment of defiance. I wasn't the scared 25-year-old anymore, looking for approval from my mother's new husband. At 45, I had finally found my voice. Frank moved toward the door, then turned with that smile, the one that had fooled so many people for so long. This isn't over, Sarah. Family looks after family. Your mother would be disappointed. As the door slammed behind him, I collapsed onto the couch, my heart racing. The mountain cabin wasn't just property. It was my sanctuary, my history, my future. And I was prepared to fight for it with everything I had. Flashback. The call 2 weeks earlier. I had been wiping sweat from my brow outside a makeshift clinic in rural New Mexico. The midday sun cast long shadows over the dusty landscape as I stepped away from the noise of the volunteer medical camp. 20 years as a nurse hadn't prepared me for the heat of the desert, but the work, helping those without access to health care, fed my soul in ways my regular job at County General never could. My phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Frank. My stepfather rarely called unless he wanted something. Hello, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Sarah. His tone was cheerful, far too cheerful. Just thought you'd want to know. I've sold the mountain cabin. Time seemed to stop. You did what? Sold it? He repeated casually. Don't look so shocked. Well, I can't see you, but I imagine you're standing there with your mouth open. It's for the greater good, mine, obviously. He laughed. That smug laugh that always made my blood boil. You had no right, I said, my voice shaking. That cabin wasn't yours to sell. Relax, he drawled. I've been managing things around here while you're off saving the world. What's the point of holding onto something you're never around to enjoy? It was an easy way to clear my debts. You'll thank me later. I hung up before he could say another word, my hands trembling with rage. The audacity of this man never ceased to amaze me. Flashback. Elizabeth. The cabin had been my mother Elizabeth's sanctuary first. I was 15 when she married Frank, still reeling from my parents' divorce. He swept into our lives with charm and sophistication, a handsome insurance executive with a winning smile who promised to take care of us. I remember the first time Mom brought him home for dinner. I was sullen and resentful, determined to hate anyone who tried to replace my father. But Frank arrived with a bouquet of Mom's favorite lilies and a book on astronomy that he'd noticed I was reading for school. Sarah's quite the science whiz, my mother had said proudly, as Frank handed me the book. The universe is fascinating, he'd replied, seeming genuinely interested. My father wanted me to follow him into banking, but I always secretly wished I'd studied astrophysics. That small connection, his interest in what interested me, had been the first crack in my teenage armor. Over the following months, as he took us to movies, helped me with my homework, and made my mother laugh again, I gradually accepted him into our lives. He's different, Sarah, Mom had said, her eyes bright with hope. He makes me laugh. After everything with your father, don't I deserve some happiness? I couldn't argue with that. After Dad left us for his 20-something secretary, Mom had been shattered. For 2 years, I watched her work double shifts as an elementary school teacher, coming home exhausted but never complaining. When Frank appeared, offering stability and charm, how could she resist? What I didn't understand then was the pattern forming right before my eyes. Frank had grown up with wealth, the son of a banker who bailed him out of trouble time and again. He never learned to manage money or delay gratification. His father's sudden death and the discovery that the family fortune had dwindled left Frank with expensive tastes and no way to sustain them. My mother, with her teacher's salary and the cabin her parents had left her, became his new safety net. Sarah, honey, Frank needs to use some of my savings for a business opportunity, she'd tell me. Or, Frank had to borrow against the house, but it's just temporary. It was never temporary. The only thing Frank never managed to touch was the cabin. It was my grandparents' retirement home, nestled in the mountains about 2 hours from our suburban neighborhood. My grandfather had built much of it himself, adding on rooms as their family grew. When they passed, they left it to my mother with the hope that it would stay in the family for generations. This place is special, Sarah, my mother said during one of our weekend trips there when I was a teenager. It holds our family's history. Some things shouldn't be for sale, no matter what. I think Frank recognized that the cabin was Mom's line in the sand. He complained about its maintenance costs and the long drive, but he never directly suggested selling it. Even he knew that would be a step too far. Until now, apparently. Making the plan, I tapped on Jennifer's name in my contacts and waited for her to pick up. We'd been friends since college, and when my mother died 3 years ago, Jennifer had helped me buy out Frank's claim to the cabin. As a lawyer, she had insisted on a formal co-ownership agreement that required both our signatures for any sale. Hey Sarah, what's up? She said cheerfully when she answered. Frank sold the cabin, I blurted out, unable to keep the anger from my voice. There was a long pause on her end. He what? Apparently, he needed the money to pay off some gambling debts, I said bitterly. He thinks he can do whatever he wants, but I know our co-ownership agreement makes that impossible. He doesn't have the authority to sell it without your consent. Jennifer let out a low whistle. That son of a bitch. He really thought he could get away with this? He always does, I replied. Mom enabled him for years. Even on her deathbed, she made me promise to look after Frank, as if he were a child, not a grown man who gambled away her retirement fund. That was the thing about Frank that outsiders never understood. Behind the charming exterior was a man who'd never faced consequences. His own father had bailed him out time and again, setting a pattern my mother continued. When I confronted her about it once, shortly after her cancer diagnosis, she'd grown defensive. You don't understand what it's like to be alone at my age, Sarah, she'd said. Sometimes keeping the peace is worth more than being right. But I understood more than she knew. My own marriage had ended 7 years ago when I discovered my husband's affairs. I chose loneliness over disrespect, a lesson my mother never learned. I'm going to need your help sorting this out, I told Jennifer. I'll finish my volunteer assignment and head back home as soon as I can. Can you pull up the legal documents in the meantime? I want to be ready to counter this when I get back. You got it, Jennifer said, her voice firm. We'll take care of this together. As I hung up, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Frank thought he'd outsmarted me, that I was too far away to do anything about his betrayal. But he didn't know who he was dealing with anymore. I wasn't the docile stepdaughter still grieving her parents' divorce. I wasn't the young nurse who'd watched my mother sacrifice her dignity for companionship. I was a woman who had rebuilt herself after her own divorce, who had found strength in standing alone. Frank was about to discover the steel beneath my scrubs. Homecoming. The flight from Albuquerque to Denver felt interminable. I'd spent my last night in New Mexico tossing and turning, my mind cycling through memories of the cabin, the smell of pine, the creak of the old wooden floors, the view of the mountains from the back porch. In my dreams, strangers wandered through the rooms, changing things, erasing the marks of my family's history. By the time the plane touched down, I was exhausted but resolute. Jennifer picked me up at the airport, her familiar face a welcome sight in the crowd. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, giving me a quick hug. "Thanks," I replied with a weary smile. Just what a girl wants to hear. Well, I brought reinforcements. She handed me a large coffee from my favorite local shop. Black with one sugar, just how you like it. As we drove toward my apartment, Jennifer filled me in on what she discovered. "I checked the county records, and there's no official transfer of ownership recorded yet," she said. "But I did find that Frank contacted Rocky Mountain Realty 3 weeks ago to list the property." 3 weeks? I exclaimed. "He's been planning this for that long?" Jennifer nodded grimly. "The agent's name is Diane Morris. I called her office, but she wouldn't discuss the details with me, confidentiality and all that. But she did seem uncomfortable when I mentioned co-ownership issues." "I'm going to bet Frank never told her about that little detail," I said. "That would be my guess too," Jennifer agreed. "Look, I've prepared a formal cease and desist letter that we can send to both Frank and the real estate agency. I've also contacted my friend at the sheriff's department, Detective Wilson. He specializes in real estate fraud cases, and he's interested in hearing more about the situation." I felt a twinge of uncertainty. Are we really talking about going to the police? Frank was, family. Jennifer shot me a sideways glance. Would he hesitate to involve the authorities if the situation were reversed? "Remember how quickly he threatened to sue your cousin Michael over that borrowed lawnmower?" She had a point. Frank had never shied away from using legal threats when it served his interests. "You're right," I admitted. "I guess I still hear my mother's voice in my head, making excuses for him." "Elizabeth was a wonderful person," Jennifer said gently, "but she had a blind spot when it came to Frank. You don't have to continue that pattern." When I finally arrived home, my apartment felt hollow and unfamiliar. I'd been gone for 3 weeks, and the plants were wilting, the mail piled high. I dropped my bags by the door and sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. Before I could even take a shower, my phone buzzed. "Frank." Well, well, if it isn't my globe-trotting stepdaughter," he said, his voice dripping with fake cheer. "Finally back to reality, huh? What do you want, Frank?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. "Just checking in," he said, his tone smug. "Making sure you're not too upset about the whole cabin situation. I mean, it's gone now, so there's no use crying over spilled milk." My jaw clenched. "Funny you should say that, because as far as I can tell, it's not gone." Jennifer and I checked the ownership records. The sale didn't go through. "You can't sell what doesn't belong to you." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to let me know I'd struck a nerve. "That's ridiculous," Frank said, his voice tightening. "The buyer paid in cash. The paperwork is handled. It's a done deal." "No, it's not," I said firmly. "Jennifer and I combed the cabin, remember? Without her consent, the sale is invalid. Legally, it's still ours." His laugh was brittle. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Always playing the perfect daughter, always trying to control everything. You don't know how hard I've had it, Sarah. I did what I had to do. You stole from me, I shot back. And you think I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? You've made your choices, Frank, and now you'll have to live with them. Your mother would be ashamed of you," he said, his voice low and threatening. Turning on family like this. It was a calculated blow, one he'd used many times before. The ghost of my mother's approval had been his shield for years. But this time it didn't land. "No, Frank. Mom would be ashamed of you for trying to sell her family's legacy to cover gambling debts. She protected that cabin from your financial mismanagement for 20 years. I'm just continuing what she started." He hung up on me, and I stood there, phone in hand, shaking with a mix of anger and triumph. For years, I'd let Frank manipulate situations, guilt trip me, and take advantage of my patience. Not anymore. I texted Jennifer. Just talked to Frank. He's still claiming the sale is legitimate. Time to escalate? Her reply came seconds later. Absolutely. I'll send the cease and desist letter today and set up a meeting with Detective Wilson for tomorrow. Get some rest. Tomorrow we fight back. At the cabin, the next evening, after meeting with Jennifer to review our legal options, I drove up to the cabin. I needed to see it to reassure myself it was still there, still mine. The winding mountain road was familiar, every curve and turn etched in my memory. As a teenager, I'd resented being dragged up here, away from my friends and the life I knew. But after my mother's diagnosis, the cabin became our refuge. As I navigated the familiar roads, memories washed over me like waves. The summer I turned 16, when Frank had just married my mother, and we spent 2 weeks at the cabin as a bonding experience. I'd been sullen and uncooperative at first, but the peace of the mountains had worked its magic even then. I remembered our last summer here, Mom's energy fading but her smile still bright as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. This place has always been my center, Sarah, she'd said. When everything else is chaos, I come here and remember who I am. Then, in a rare moment of clarity about Frank, I know he's not perfect. I know he's taken more than he's given. But we all have our weaknesses. His is money, mine is him. She'd laugh then, a sad little laugh that broke my heart. As I pulled up to the cabin, relief washed over me. It stood exactly as I'd left it, nestled among the pines, the afternoon sun catching on the windows. No sign of new owners, no changes to the property. I unlocked the door with my key and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke. The interior was dusty but untouched. I ran my hand along the back of the sofa, remembering how I'd helped Mom pick it out. We'd spent a whole Saturday at furniture stores, laughing over ridiculous patterns before finding this simple, sturdy piece. The cabin wasn't just walls and a roof. It was 20 years of memories. It was the Christmas when it snowed so much we were stranded for 3 days. It was the weekend I brought my college boyfriend home, and Mom embarrassed me by showing him my baby pictures. It was the spring after my divorce when I came here alone and cried for 2 straight days, then woke up on the third morning feeling like I could breathe again. And it was those final months of Mom's life, when we moved her up here so she could see the mountains from her bed. Jennifer had helped me transform the living room into a comfortable bedroom, and we'd taken turns caring for Mom, reading to her, making her tea, and simply sitting with her as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Promise me you'll keep this place, Mom had whispered one evening, her hand clasping mine weakly. No matter what Frank says or does. This is your heritage, not his. I had promised. And now I would keep that promise, whatever it took. The confrontation. The next morning, Jennifer called with news. I've spoken with Detective Wilson at the county sheriff's office. He specializes in real estate fraud, and he's interested in your case. Also, I tracked down the real estate agent Frank used. She's cooperating fully. Apparently, she had no idea about the co-ownership situation. That sounds like Frank, I said, always conveniently leaving out crucial details. The agent says the buyer hasn't paid in full yet because she flagged the transaction as unusual. She's going to provide us with all the documents. Sarah, we've got him. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, Jennifer. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd figure it out, she said. But that's what friends are for. I was still smiling when a sharp knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Frank standing there, his usual smugness replaced with a barely contained anger. We need to talk, he said, pushing past me into the apartment. I folded my arms across my chest. What do you want, Frank? Look, Sarah, he started, his tone dripping with condescension. I know you're upset, but you have to understand my position. I was desperate. The people I owed money to, they're not the kind you keep waiting. I raised an eyebrow. And you thought stealing my property was the solution? Borrowing, he corrected, as though that made it better. I was going to make it back. Once my luck turned around, I would have paid you back every penny. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Your luck? That's what you're betting on. You've been gambling away money for as long as I've known you, and it's never worked out. Why would this time be any different? His face flushed, and for a moment, I saw something I'd never seen before, genuine shame. Then it was gone, replaced by the defensive anger I knew so well. "You're overreacting," he said dismissively. "It's just a cabin. You're not even there most of the time. Why not let someone else make use of it?" "Because it's mine," I snapped, stepping toward him. "Because it's my home. You don't get to decide what I value or what I do with my property." "It was Elizabeth's first," he counted. "And I was her husband. I have rights too. Rights that you signed away 3 years ago," I reminded him. "After Mom died, you agreed to let Jennifer and me buy out your interest in the cabin, remember? You were happy enough to take that money then." He waved his hand dismissively. "That was different. I didn't need the money as urgently then. Your poor planning doesn't constitute an emergency on my part," I said firmly. "The cabin isn't yours to sell. Period." His voice turned menacing. "You wouldn't really go to the authorities, would you? You wouldn't ruin your own stepfather like that." I met his gaze steadily. "Try me." In that moment, I saw the true Frank, not the charming facade he showed the world, but the desperate, entitled man beneath. He'd been running from consequences his entire life, always finding someone else to clean up his messes. First his father, then my mother, and now he expected me to continue the pattern. "This isn't over," he said, heading for the door. "Yes, it is," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not Mom, Frank. I won't sacrifice what matters to me just to keep you comfortable." Those days are over. The door slammed behind him, and I stood there, breathing deeply. I felt lighter somehow, as though I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for 20 years. The confrontation had left me shaken, but also strangely exhilarated. I wasn't just defending a piece of property. I was reclaiming my voice, my boundaries, my life. Resolution. The legal process moved swiftly after that. Detective Wilson contacted the buyer, who immediately backed out of the deal when he learned about the co-ownership. The real estate agent provided all the documentation showing Frank had misrepresented his authority to sell the property. Within a week, the sale was officially voided, and Frank was facing charges of fraudulent misrepresentation. I didn't hear from him directly again. My aunt called once, Frank's sister, who had always enabled his behavior just as my mother had. "You know he's always been impulsive, Sarah," she said, her voice gentle but reproachful. "Couldn't you just work something out? He's family, after all." "That's exactly why he should have respected my boundaries," I replied. "And no, I'm not working something out. This time, Frank needs to face the consequences of his actions." She sighed. Elizabeth always forgave him. "And look where that got her," I said, more sharply than I intended. "I loved my mother, but she taught me what not to do as much as what to do." "He could go to jail, Sarah," my aunt persisted. "Is that really what you want?" The question gave me pause. Did I want Frank to go to jail? The angry part of me thought it might be exactly what he needed, finally facing real consequences for his actions. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the man who had once helped me with my astronomy homework, hesitated. "What I want," I said carefully, "is for Frank to understand that he can't take what isn't his. I want him to stop using other people to solve his problems. And I want him to get help for his gambling addiction before it destroys him completely." My aunt was quiet for a moment. "He is seeing someone," she finally admitted. "A therapist specializing in addiction. Part of his plea agreement with the DAW." This surprised me. "He took a plea deal?" "Yes, last week. No jail time, but probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. He also has to pay back the deposit the buyer gave him." I hadn't known about this. Detective Wilson had mentioned the possibility of a plea deal, but I hadn't heard it was finalized. "That's good," I said, meaning it. I never wanted to punish him. I just wanted my cabin back and for him to understand he can't keep taking from others. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time, thinking about patterns and cycles, about the silent lessons passed from parent to child. My mother had taught me compassion and kindness, but also how dangerous it is to let others define your worth. In her own way, she'd given me the strength to stand up to Frank, even if she'd never found that strength herself. I thought about my nursing career, how I'd spent decades caring for others, my patients, my mother, even Frank in his way. Like many women my age, I'd been conditioned to put others' needs before my own, to keep the peace at any cost. It was the same pattern I'd watched my mother follow with Frank, with disastrous results. Somehow, in fighting for the cabin, I'd also been fighting for myself, for my right to draw boundaries, to demand respect, to prioritize my own well being. 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Frank's, elegant and precise, like everything about his outward appearance. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what to expect, more manipulation, perhaps, or a last attempt to make me feel guilty. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines. Sarah, I'm sorry. The cabin was never mine to sell. Your mother protected it from me for a reason, and I should have respected that. I'm getting help now. Not for you, but for me. Frank, no excuses, no justifications, just a simple acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever gotten from him before. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Epilogue. The early spring air was crisp as Jennifer and I sat on the cabin's porch, wine glasses in hand, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. We'd spent the day cleaning, repairing a few loose boards, and planting wildflower seeds along the edge of the property. To new beginnings, Jennifer said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers. And to standing your ground. You know, she said, looking out at the view. When your mom first got sick and you asked me to help with the legal work for this place, I was worried about you. Worried? Why? Because I saw how Frank manipulated her, how she always gave in to keep the peace. I was afraid you'd do the same. I smiled, watching the last rays of sun slip behind the mountains. I learned from her mistakes. And from my own. So what's next for you, Sarah? You've taken back the cabin, stood up to Frank. What's the next big move? I took a sip of wine, letting the question settle. In my 20-year nursing career, I'd always put others first, my patients, my ex-husband, my mother, even Frank. It was what women my age had been taught to do. But something had changed in me during this battle for the cabin. I'm going to keep doing what I love, nursing, volunteering, coming up here whenever I can, I said slowly. But I'm also going to start that nursing education program I've always talked about. The one for rural communities like the place I volunteered in New Mexico. Jennifer's face lit up. Really? That's fantastic. It's time, I said simply. I've spent decades caring for everyone else. Now I'm going to use that experience to build something that's truly mine. And this time, I'm not apologizing for taking up space in my own life. As darkness fell, I thought about my mother's last days in this cabin, about her final gift to me. Not just the property itself, but the lesson hidden within it. That some things are worth fighting for, that self-respect isn't selfish, and that it's never too late to find your voice. The cabin lights glowed warmly against the night, a beacon of safety and belonging. Frank had tried to take this from me, but in doing so, he'd given me something unexpected, the courage to break the patterns of the past and step fully into my own life. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home, not just in the cabin, but in my own skin.